Simon says subscribe and click on the bell icon to receive notifications.
Now, what I have on the page here, again, a very small example, I have some part numbers listed. And what I want to do is find out the description for that part number and the unit price for that part number. Now, I have this information stored on another worksheet, the parts catalog worksheet. You can see here in column A, I have all of the part numbers. I then have the descriptions and I then have the prices. So effectively, what I want to do is I want to perform a lookup. We're going to use the part number as the lookup value because that's the thing that exists in both tables. And I want it to return the description and then the unit price. Now, the way that I like to do this, and this is a little tip, you don't have to do this, but it does make your life a lot easier, is when you have a table like this, and this is going to be our lookup table, what we're looking information up in. Instead of having to go in and select the entire table every time, you might have a very, very long table. I always like to name this as a range to make it a lot easier when I'm putting together my VLOOKUP. If you've never named ranges before, don't worry, it's not particularly difficult. All we're doing here is basically selecting a cell range and giving it a meaningful name, which we can then use in our formulas. Control A is going to select all of my data. Just above where it says part catalog, where it currently says B7, we have our name box. So this is a really quick way of just naming this range of data. Now, really important, when you're naming ranges, you can't have a space separating your words. You have to either make it all one word or separate with underscores, as I've done here. So now this range of cells, this table effectively, is named parts catalog. It's going to make it a lot easier for me to use in my VLOOKUP. So let's construct our VLOOKUP. Now, before we get going on that, I should mention, if we jump up to the Formulas tab, if you're wondering where VLOOKUP lives in your function library, you're going to find it underneath Lookup and Reference. It's all the way down the bottom just here. So if you're somebody who prefers to use the function arguments dialog box as opposed to typing it directly into the cell, this is where you can do it from. Now, we're not going to do it that way. We're just going to type it straight in. All right, so the first thing we want to return here is the description for the part number. Now, if we type in equals VLOOKUP, and we can press the tab key to put that first bracket in, let's take a look at our arguments. The first argument here is the lookup value. So our lookup value is going to be that part number because that's what we're looking up in the table. We then need to provide the table array, so what we're looking up in, so it's going to be that parts catalog table. The third argument is the column index number. Now, what is that? Well, the column index number is basically the column number that we want to return. So if we just come out of here a moment and go back to our parts catalog, what do I want to return? I want to return the description. Now, the way that VLOOKUP looks at this type of data is it numbers columns from left to right. So your part number is column number 1, description is column number 2, and the price is column number 3. So if I want to return the description, that's going to be column number 2. That's what we're going to have for our third argument. So let's do that first of all. Let's go for VLOOKUP. Our lookup value is going to be what we have in cell A5. Now I'm going to copy this formula down so I don't need to lock that value. Let's comma to move on to our next argument. The next argument is our table array. So this is where we need to go in and select our parts catalog. Now you could jump across to the other worksheet and just select the cell range, but if you have a very large data set, that can be a little bit tedious, which is why I like to give it a name Because at this stage, all you then have to do is press the F3 key on your keyboard, and there is your named range. It's so much easier to do it that way. So that is what we're looking up the part number in the parts catalog. We then need to specify what we want to return. So we want to return the description, which we already established is column number 2. And then the final argument on the end here is an optional argument. How do we know it's optional? It's in square brackets. So I don't have to add an argument onto the end here. If I was just to close the bracket and hit enter, by default, VLOOKUP is going to do an exact match, which is what we're doing in this example anyway. But if I do type a comma, I get the option of true, which is an approximate match. We're going to do that in the next example, or a false, an exact match. And what this false argument will basically do is we're saying we want to exactly match that part number in the parts catalog. So let's close off our bracket. If you want to stay in the same cell so that you can copy down, remember you can do Control Enter, and that will leave you in the same cell. So it's returned our description. Double click to copy down. Now notice that one of these parts, we have an NA in here, and I'm going to show you how we can deal with that type of situation in a moment. Let's first move on and just complete our unit price column. Now this is going to be exactly the same. The only difference is the column that we're returning. So instead of returning column 2 this time, we want to return the price, which is column number 3. So same process, VLOOKUP. Our lookup value is the part number. Our table array, well, we named our table, so I can press the F3 key. We can select parts catalog. What column do we want to return? We want to return the price, which is column number 3. And then we want to exactly match the part number, so we need a false argument. Remember, when you have true or false on the end, you can substitute them with 1 for true or 0 for false. So I could put a 0 on the end here, or because false is the default, I don't have to put anything on the end here. Now we're going to put a 0. Let's close the bracket, Control Enter to stay in that same cell, which makes it a lot easier for us to just double click and copy that down. So that is a VLOOKUP in its most basic form. It's not that difficult when you break it down. Now, as I said, you can see that we've got these horrible NA errors occurring in here. Now, why might I be getting those? Well, I'm going to guess that this part number probably doesn't exist in the parts catalog. So I could go through and maybe do something like a find, so Control F. I could look for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and see if I can find it, which I can't. So that is why I'm getting the NA error, because it can't find that part number. Now, one thing with Excel that we always recommend you do is add in some error handling into your formulas, because if I was going to share this with one of my team colleagues and they just see NAs or errors all over the place, they might get a bit worried. They might think, well, have I touched something? Have I changed a formula? You might want to make this a little bit more explanatory so that everybody can understand what's going on here. So I'm going to add some error checking into my VLOOKUP formula. Now notice that the errors that we have here are NA errors. And there is a formula in Excel specifically for dealing with or giving meaning to NA errors. So I'm going to click up in cell B5 where we have our first VLOOKUP. I'm working up in the formula bar now, and I'm just going to wrap this VLOOKUP in an if NA. Notice that underneath there are 2 arguments for if NA, value and value if NA. Now, the value of this cell is going to be generated by the VLOOKUP. So I can click at the end, comma. Now I can specify what I want it to say if it doesn't find the lookup value in the table. So I'm going to get it to say part not found. Now remember, when you're dealing with text in your formulas, they must always be enclosed in double quotes. You can close off at if NA, Control, Enter. And now if we double click to recopy this down, notice that it says part not found as opposed to NA. So that's a lot easier for users to understand as opposed to just NA errors everywhere. We can do the same over here. So let's click up in the formula bar. We're going to wrap our VLOOKUP in an if NA. Let's go to the end and specify what we want it to say. So I'm going to say price not found in quote marks. Control, Enter, and then when we double click, that's now a lot more meaningful. So that is how you can combine a VLOOKUP with a little bit of error handling just to make this more meaningful. So VLOOKUP, not as scary as it might first seem. Let's move across to taking a look at an example of that true argument on the end. So the last VLOOKUP we did, we had false on the end. That's when we're doing an exact match. We're exactly looking for the part number in the table. But this example, we can't do an exact match. So let's take a look at it. What I have in this first table are basically some salary ranges. And then on the end here, we have the tax rate that's applied for each of these salary ranges. Now, what I'm aiming to do here in this other small table is I want to find out what the tax rate is for these different salaries. Now, if we take the first one here of $55,000, if I look in my table, I don't have $55,000 listed anywhere exactly. 55,000 is kind of going to fall within this range just here. So because I'm not looking for an exact match, I need to have an approximate match on the end as opposed to an exact match. Okay, so this is where this true argument comes in. So let's take a look at how this works. Pretty much the same. We're going to go the VLOOKUP, open a bracket. Our lookup value, well, this time it's going to be what we have in cell E5. Table array. Now, I didn't give this table a name. So let's take a look at how we would do it if we don't name our tables. All we need to do is select the table where we want to look up the information. Now, one extra thing you need to do here, if you intend on copying this formula down, remember that's going to move your table cell range as well, unless you lock the table in place. So at this stage, we need to press F4 on our keyboard to keep that table locked in place. We then specify the column index number. So what do we want to return? We want to return the tax rate. Now remember, with VLOOKUP, you number columns from left to right. So the tax rate column is column number 3. What are we doing here? Are we doing an exact match? Are we exactly matching 55,000 in the table? No, we're not. So we want to have a true argument on the end here. Close the bracket, Control, Enter, and that's going to give us our tax rate. So let's just do a quick visual check to make sure that is correct. 55,000 is in fact in this range, and there we have 25%. What I should be able to do now, because I locked that, is copy those down, and we can just check. The first one here is 10%, and then we have 90,000, which is in this range, and that is 28%. So that is the difference between approximate match and exact match. It's really just related to that last argument of true or false. The only real difference between VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP is really how you have your data structured. So VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup. And I will say that most of the data that you're going to come across is in a vertical format. For example, this parts catalog is in a vertical format. We have our column headings at the top and our data running down. But you might come across data that is in a horizontal format. So let's take a look at that. Now, I've gone for a little bit of a movie theme on this example. We're going to look up some information. So I want to be able to type in a film name and I want it to return the year, the rating, and the genre. And I have this information stored off on the movie database worksheet. So again, just a reasonably small table. Now, currently, this data is structured vertically. So I'm going to flip this around so it's displayed horizontally, and then I'm going to show you how we can do an HLOOKUP. So this is going to show you a couple of other little techniques in Excel if you've never done this before. If you do quickly need to flip your data the other way around, you can use the transpose. I find easier to use underneath paste special. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this table, Control C to copy it, and I'm going to paste it on the other page down here. So if we jump up to the Home tab, click the lower half of the Paste button and jump into Paste Special, notice we have a transpose option just here. And when I click on OK, that's going to flip my data the other way round. So notice that we now have the column headings running this way, and all of our data is kind of running across the worksheet. Now, this is a really ugly way to display data. You'd be surprised. Sometimes you do receive a spreadsheet that kind of looks like this, and you need to be able to handle VLOOKUPs and HLOOKUPs with it. So how do we do a lookup when it's structured this way? Well, the good news is it's pretty much virtually exactly the same as a VLOOKUP. So we're going to type in HLOOKUP. Take a look at the arguments, pretty much exactly the same. We need our lookup value. Well, our lookup value is going to be the film, comma, our table array. Now, our table array is this big, long table here. So again, I would probably give this a name to make it a bit easier. I haven't done that, so I'm just going to select the entire thing. Let's drag it across. Hopefully it's not too long. Let's go all the way back, comma, row index number this time. So instead of a column index number, it's asking us for a row index number. So I want to pull back the year. So which row is year in? Again, we start from the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. So year is row number 2. And then we can specify if we're doing a true or a false. So we're doing the exact match of the film name. So we want a false on the end. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's returning the year of 2016. Okay, let's do it one more time just so we can practice. This time I am going to name the range. So let's Control A to select it all. Let's jump up to our name box. And I'm just going to call this movies. And now if we do our HLOOKUP again, our lookup value is our movie. Table array, because we've named it, we can press F3. We can select movies, click on OK. This time we want to return what the movie is rated, which is row number 3. And we want to do an exact match, so you can have a false or a 0 on the end. Close the bracket, hit enter. Okay, so really straightforward, virtually the same as VLOOKUP. Now, index and match are two separate functions in their own right, but you so often hear them kind of combined together because when you do combine them, they can produce really powerful and complex lookups. And it doesn't matter where your lookup value is in the table when you're using index and match together. So once again, this is something which people do tend to struggle with. I know a lot of people who find index and match really hard to understand. So let's walk through this slowly and hopefully all will become clear. Now, before we do that, I'm going to just throw in a little bonus tip because I don't want to have to keep typing in the application into this box. I want to be able to select the application from a drop-down list. So if you've never used data validation drop-down lists before, then you are in for a treat. I use these all the time. So we're going to create a list of all of our applications. For this, we go up to the Data tab, and in the Data Tools group, we have a Data Validation drop-down. So let's choose Data Validation. Now on this Settings page, I want to create a list, and then I just need to provide the values that I want to be in that list. So I want a list of all of the apps, as simple as that. So now I get a drop down and I can select whichever one I want, and it just means I'm not having to type them in each time. Now that we've done that, let's take a look at index and match. Now, as I said, these are two separate functions. So we're going to look at each one individually so you understand what each one does, and then that will give you an understanding as to why they work so well together. So let's take a look at index first of all. I'm going to type in equals. We're going to go for index. The general rule here is for most things that you do, it's this top row that you're using here. And that's exactly what we're going to be using in this particular formula. So the first argument for our index formula is array. So what is an array? An array is basically a range of cells. And the way that I like to remember this is your first argument, the array, is always the cell range that contains what you're trying to return. So we want to return the category. Where am I going to find the category? Well, I'm going to find the category in this range just here. That is always your array. I used to struggle to remember what that was when I was learning this formula. So I just remember that it's what I'm looking up, basically, the whole range that contains my answer, comma. The next argument is row number. Now, the app that I've got selected is Instagram. So if I look in the table, where is Instagram? It's towards the bottom. So if I count down till we get to Instagram, how many rows is that? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's 9. So the row number is 9. Let's close that off and hit enter. And that's going to tell me that the category for Instagram is social media, which is correct. Now, that's all well and good. I've got a fairly small data set, but what if I had a data set that had thousands and thousands of rows? Do I really want to spend my time counting down in order to find that row number? No, I do not. So we need to find a better way of finding this row number. And that is where the match function comes in. So let's take a look at match on its own. I'm going to type in equals match. For the match formula, we have 3 arguments. The last one is optional. The match requires the lookup value. So what are we looking up? Well, we want to find Instagram. So whatever we have in cell H5. Where are we going to find Instagram? Well, we're going to find it in the apps list. Do we want to do an exact match of the word Instagram? Yes, we do. So we have a 0 on the end there. Close the bracket, hit enter. And would you take a look at that? It gives us the row number. So hopefully you kind of see how these work together. This match formula will generate the row number, and we can then feed that into our index formula to produce our lookup. So let's do the whole lot from the beginning. Equals index. We need to specify our array. Remember, it's what we're looking up. In this case, the category, comma, row number. Well, we want the match formula to generate our row number, so we go straight into a match. A lookup value is Instagram, comma. We're looking that up in the apps list, comma, and we want to exactly match the word Instagram. So we have a 0 on the end there. We close off our match and we close off our index. Hit enter and we get the result that we want. So that is how you do a lookup with index and match. Let's do it again because practice makes perfect. This time we're going to look up the profit. So equals index. What's our array? So this time it's going to be the profit, comma, row number. We go into our match. Our lookup value, again, is H5. We're looking it up in the apps list and we're doing an exact match. Close off match, close off index, hit enter, and we get our result. And because we have this on a data validation drop-down list, if I change it to something else, all of these values update. Okay, so index and match used together is a really powerful way to perform lookups. I find that I use this more than VLOOKUP these days, simply because I know index and match is pretty much going to work no matter what I'm looking up and what data I have in my table, whereas VLOOKUP does have that limitation of the lookup value having to always be to the left of what you're looking up. Okay. So I'll leave it to you to decide which one you want to go with. XLOOKUP isn't available in all versions of Excel. It is available if you have Microsoft 365, you should have access to XLOOKUP. Also, if you have Excel 2021, which is actually what I'm using here, the standalone version, the non-subscription version, you're going to have it in there as well. If you're not sure if you have it or not, just simply type in to a cell, any cell, equals XLOOKUP, and if you can see the arguments underneath, then you have access to that function. If you can't see anything there, then you're going to need to use index and match until you get an update and you get XLOOKUP. So let's have a look at XLOOKUP. We're going to use XLOOKUP to return the revenue just here. And I'll show you how much easier this is. So we have a lot more arguments for XLOOKUP, but notice that 3 of them are all optional. So you don't have to do these last 3. You can do a very basic XLOOKUP just with 3 arguments. So this is so straightforward. XLOOKUP, lookup value. What are we looking up? We're looking up Facebook, comma. Where are we looking that up? Where are we going to find Facebook? Well, we're going to find it in the apps list. What do we want to return? We want to return the revenue. So we just need to select revenue. That is it. Close the bracket, hit enter. So much easier than doing index and match. Now, in case you're wondering about those other arguments, let's just double click and go back in. These optional arguments on the end allow you to specify things a bit further. So if, for example, the word Facebook wasn't found in the table, I could specify text to return if it doesn't find the lookup value. So I could just put something in there like not found, comma. I can choose if I want to do an exact match, if I want to exactly match it or find the next smaller item or the next larger item, whatever we want to do. So I can do an exact match. And then the last option here is which way I want to search through my table. So this is something you can't really do with index and match. So with index and match, you can only search from top to bottom, at least with that basic formula. But with XLOOKUP, you can say, I want to search from the top to the bottom, or I want to search from the bottom to the top, which can be useful if you have duplicate values in your table. Also, if you have your data sorted, you have some options there for which way you're searching in your sorted data. And we're going to take a look at an example of this in a moment. Okay, so that is just what those additional options are on the end. We're not going to have those in this example. We're just going to have those basic 3. And I should be able to switch to something different and everything is going to update. So let's move on to another example. And this is actually more of a practical example of how you can use some of those additional arguments for XLOOKUP. So what we have here is a little table which shows some employee names, the department they work in, and the last time they were absent from work. And what you'll notice is that the employee names, they repeat. So they're not unique in here. They repeat over and over again. So we have Gareth Osborne there. Do we have another one? Yes, we do. We have a couple of Aisha Jacobs. We have a couple of Tracy Bells. So there isn't just one instance of an employee name. There's multiple. And what I want to find is the last time that this person was absent. Well, that is where we can use that argument in XLOOKUP. So if we go to XLOOKUP, our lookup value is going to be Tracy Bell. Where are we looking up her name? Well, we're looking it up in the employee array. What do we want to return? Well, we want to return the absent date. So that's this array just here. If not found, do I want it to say anything? I could type in some text there. If you don't want to type anything in there, you can just press comma to move on to the next argument. I want to exactly match the name Tracy Bell, so we're going to do an exact match there. But this time, because I'm looking for the last one, I want to go from the bottom of the list up. So I want to search from last to first. So I can have a -1 on the end there. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to give me that last absent date. So that's just an example of those additional XLOOKUP options. Honestly, when this was released, I can't believe it. This is the function that I've been looking for my entire life. What this will allow us to do is it will allow us to extract a unique list from a range of cells. So effectively, it's almost like it removes duplicates from a list, and it is so simple to use. You can see here, I have another table of data. So let's just say that this is for invoices. Okay, we have invoice number column, we have a date column, we have a client column, amount and status. Now, maybe over here in columns I and J, I simply want a list of all of the clients, and then I want to maybe work out their total using a SUMIFS formula. Now, if you take a look at my table over here, you can see that my clients repeat. Okay, so they're not individual. I have Facebook a number of times here. I have Gramson, I have Gaggle, I have Oracled. So I have duplicates of the client names. Now over here, I just want a unique list. So this is where we can use unique. And it is so simple. We simply select the array, which is just another name for a range of cells, close the bracket, hit enter, and it's basically going to remove those duplicates and just give us a list of all of those unique clients. And then, of course, once we have this list, we can then do whatever calculation we need based off of this list. So maybe I want to find out how much each client has paid. Okay, so I want to sum the amount column for each client. So that is where I would use a SUMIFS. SUMIFS will allow me to sum whatever I specify. So I want to sum the amounts, and we're going to lock those cells when the criteria is equal to Facebook. So where are we going to find the criteria? We're going to find it over here. That's our criteria range, and our criteria is Facebook. And I need to lock this if I want to copy it down by pressing F4. Close the bracket, and then I can copy that down. So that's a really nice practical way of how you can use unique to extract a unique list from a table and then utilize it with other formulas like SUMIFS to get your totals. Okay, so unique is an absolutely amazing formula. Now, one thing that you'll find here when you're using unique, if I was to add more invoices to the bottom here, so let's just copy this bottom one. And let's just paste it down here. And I'm just going to change the client name to something else. Let's go for Snapple. Notice that the clients don't update over here. It doesn't add Snapple on the end here. Now, I can get that to add it automatically because in general, it's always good to make everything that we're doing dynamic. I can get it to add automatically by putting my data set into a table. So I'm going to delete out the unique function and let's get rid of these sum ifs as well. And let's put our data into a table this time. So Control T. Yes, my table has headers. Let's click on OK. And that is very horrible formatting. So let's go to table styles and I'm just going to switch it to none. Now, remember with tables, if you're not used to using tables, tables are one of the best things you can ever use in Excel because they have this auto expand capability. So anytime you add anything onto the bottom of a table, it will automatically update anything that's using that table data. Now, I'm going to name my table. If we go up to the table design ribbon over in the first group here, can you see it says table 1? So we have a default table name. I'm going to change this to invoices and hit enter. So now if I'm using unique over here, what I can do is say unique, and then I can use the column like that. I can just select it. So you can see now, instead of cell references, we get table references. So it's telling me that I'm using the invoices table and I've selected the client column. When I close it, we get exactly the same result, and that is we get a list of clients. But this time, if I was to add another invoice on the end here, so let's do Control C, Control V, and I'm going to change this to Snapple again. Can you see that it automatically updates? Okay, so just bear that in mind. Putting things in a table and combining that with dynamic arrays is a really powerful way of making your entire worksheet really dynamic and easy to update. Let's deal with filter first of all, because this is another really popular dynamic array function, and people really love this function. And some people don't really get why we use it because people say, well, we already have many ways of filtering data in Excel, which is true. Again, we have our same data set, our invoices, and the traditional way to filter this data set would be to essentially just add some filters at the top here, those little drop down arrows. So if we go to the data tab, we can turn on filters and we get our little drop downs. So if I click the drop down here, I can choose what I want to filter by. I'm sure we all know how to use this. It's going to filter the list below. So why do we need a function specifically related to filtering? Well, there are a couple of drawbacks of using this little drop down method. The first one being you can only filter your data in place. So I can only filter my data in this specific range of cells in this table. I can't select a filter from here and have it output the results over here. Okay, so we're very much restricted to where our filtered results are going to be. And also, we can't combine it with formulas to make the filtering more powerful. So that is essentially what the filter formula allows us to do. We can output the results of the filter anywhere to any cells. And we can also combine it with other formulas and functions to make it even more powerful. And one way that I see people combining other formulas with filter a lot is by using sort. So people will filter their data and then they will sort it using the new sort dynamic array function. And that's pretty much what we're going to do here, but we're also going to use unique. So we're going to, or what we're aiming to do here is I want to be able to choose a client from a drop-down menu in cell J4. So we're going to build a little data validation list based off of the clients that we have in here. And I want to be able to select a client from this drop-down and then have it produce down here just the invoices. So it's effectively applying a filter based on whatever we've selected in the data validation up here. So the first step of this is building our data validation list, and we want to make sure that we have unique values in our data validation. So again, this is another way that I love to use the unique formula to work with data validation. So somewhere over here, it doesn't matter where, just in a random column, I'm going to, again, get a unique list of all of the clients. Now, you could put this into a table, again, to make everything completely unique. I'm not going to at this stage. We're just going to select these and hit enter. So we have our little list of unique clients over here. And if you take a look in the formula bar, there is our unique formula. I could also use the sort dynamic array formula to sort my unique list alphabetically. So while we're here, let's do that. I can add sort onto the beginning. So this is another dynamic array function. You can see the arguments underneath. The first argument is the array. Now, if I click on this, it's going to highlight the unique function. So our array is basically being generated by the unique function. So we just need to go on to the end here, comma, and provide the sort index. So this is where we can choose what we want to sort by, or if we want to sort descending, ascending, things like that. Now, you don't have to add anything onto the end here. You can just simply close the bracket. The default is to sort them at A to Z. So you don't have to actually add anything onto the end if that's what you want to do. So now I have these sorted. So now I have this, I can build my data validation dropdown. So let's click in cell J4. We're going to go up to data, and then in the data tools group, we're going to choose data validation. If you've never used this before, the most popular one, there's lots of different types of data validation that you can do in here, but by far the most popular is to create a drop-down list in a cell. So we're going to choose list, and then we just need to provide our source. So my source is going to be my unique list of clients that I have in column O. Now I could go in, I could select the entire range like that, but with dynamic arrays, you don't actually even have to do that. All you need to do is select the first one and add the hash symbol on the end. Okay, that hash symbol basically means the spill range. So it will pick up everything within that spill range. Remember, that's the terminology we use when we're working with dynamic arrays. So if I click on OK, I now get a little drop down, and there is my list of clients. So that's another way that you can use unique. We've seen how we can use sort to sort that list, and we've built out our data validation dropdown. So now that we have this, we need to use this to filter our table of results based on what we've selected in the data validation list. So this is where we can use the filter function. Now, it's worth noting here that I'm going to be returning all of the columns from this table. So I want to return invoice number, date, client amount, and status. You don't have to return all of the columns. It might be that you only want to return the invoice number, the date, and the client. That's absolutely fine. And I'll show you where you specify this. So if we type in filter first of all, the first argument is the array. So this is where you specify what columns you want to return. So I want to return everything, so I'm going to select everything. But if you only wanted to return 3 of the columns, you would just need to select 3 of them. Okay, so you specify your array, B5 to F24, comma, and then you specify what you want to include. Okay, so we want to include when the client equals whatever we have in cell J4. So I want to include when this column is equal to what we have up here. Okay. Now, the last argument of filter is an optional argument. It's in square brackets, which means it's not mandatory. We could end our formula now, but let's add this in. What this says is, if it doesn't find any results, what do you want it to say? So I'm just going to put in quote marks. If it can't find anything or nothing matches, we're just going to have no invoices in there. Close the bracket and hit enter, and you can see the results are being returned for Gramzon. If I change this to Facebook, I'm getting those results. Okay, so this works really, really well. With these dynamic array formulas, notice if I click in this cell, I can go up to the formula bar and I can edit the filter. If I click in one of these other cells, I can't. It's grayed out. So now that we have this very basic filter, you can also filter on multiple criteria. So we just specified one piece of criteria here. Our criteria was simply that we filter for this particular client. So one piece of criteria. Now, maybe I want to filter on two pieces of criteria. Maybe I want to filter for all clients that match what we've selected in the data validation dropdown, but only clients that have a status of, let's say, paid. Okay, so we have two pieces of criteria. How are we going to set up our filter? Well, let's delete it out and start again. We're going to go for filter one more time. Our array, again, I want to return everything, so we're going to select everything. Then when it comes to what we want to include, if you have more than one piece of criteria, you need to put it in brackets. We're going to open a bracket, and the first thing we want to include is basically what we included last time. So we want to say when the client is equal to what we have in cell J4. That's our first piece of criteria. We close the bracket. We then need to do multiply in here, or asterisk. And what this asterisk means is basically and, okay? And then we have our second piece of criteria. So I want it to filter for all clients that are equal to oracled in this example, and when they have a status of paid. So our second piece of criteria is going to be when this column is equal to, and we're just going to say paid, and close the bracket. Again, if we want to add in that optional last argument, we can add in no invoices on the end there. Enter, and you can see that's exactly what we get. Let's make sure it's working for other ones. There you go. There's an example of that third or that optional argument in action. It hasn't found any invoices for Gramson with the status of paid, and so we're getting no invoices. If we select oracled, we have a few in there. Okay, so this filter formula is really, really useful. Now, you could carry on adding different pieces of criteria. Again, if you cast your eyes up into the formula bar, if I wanted to add a third piece of criteria, I would just repeat this pattern. I would click at the end here. I would do another asterisk, meaning and then put my third piece of criteria in closed brackets. So you can really expand on this and really customize it however you like. It's also worth noting with this filter formula, you can change the little operator that you're using. So instead of doing an and, I could change the asterisk to a plus, and we're effectively doing an or there. So you can see that the results have now completely changed because it's now looking for where clients are equal to oracled or if the status is paid. Okay, so if you can see one with not paid in there, that's going to be oracled because it's going to include both. All right. And there are other things apart from asterisks and plus that you can use in your filter formula to get it to do different things. And I would highly recommend that you do jump on online and take a look at the different operators that you can use with filter, because it can get really, really interesting. And of course, with this, we can then combine it with the sort dynamic array if we want to sort our results. So maybe I want to sort these by date. I can go up to my filter formula in the formula bar. I can add sort onto the beginning. My array is being generated by the filter formula. So if we click at the end here, I can then choose my sort index. Now, a sort index is basically the column number that you want to sort by. So if I wanted to sort my results by the date column, that is column number 2 in the table. So my sort index here would be 2. I could close it, hit enter, and it's going to sort them by that date column. Again, if I don't specify ascending or descending, it's going to do ascending by default. All right, so that is how you can combine all of these different formulas together. Now, I would definitely say that sort by I use a lot less than I use sort. Sort by is very similar to sort, except instead of sorting on a range of cells like sort does, sort by sorts a range of cells by another range or array. Okay. So it does work in a little bit of a different way. So I'll show you a very quick example. I'm not going to linger too long on this because most of the time you're probably going to use sort. But we do have sort by in here. And we can choose the array, again, what we want to return. I want to return all of the columns, so I can select everything just here. I've got this in a table, which is why it's saying table 3. And then instead of providing a sort index number like we did last time, which is a column number, 1, 2, 3, 4, this time we choose an array that we want to sort by. So maybe I want to sort by, let's go for clients, why not? I would select this array, and then I can choose the sort order, ascending or descending. So let's do -1 for descending. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's basically going to sort that information as I've specified. Okay. There's a very small difference between sort and sort by. One uses an index number, one uses an array to sort by. Now, rand array, again, this is one of the newer dynamic functions. This will allow you to generate an array of random numbers, as it might suggest by the name. Now, why would this be useful to you? Why would you need random numbers in cells? Well, I have to say that for me and the type of work that I do, I use rand array all the time because I'm constantly generating data sets and practice files. I will use the rand array function. So this might be something that you find useful if you want to generate your own dummy data. So let me just show you how it works. It is so simple. You can see here I've got a little table. We have months, January to December, and we've just put Q1 to Q4. And maybe I just want to fill all of these cells in the middle with some randomly generated numbers. Or we can use rand array to do this. You can see here we've got quite a few arguments. They are all optional, which is slightly weird, but they are all optional. We're going to use all of them. The first thing is we need to specify the number of rows. So how many rows of random numbers do we want? Now, in this case, because I want a small amount of rows, I only want January to December, I know that the number of rows I want is 12. I'm going to show you in a moment how you can do this if you have a large amount of rows, a much quicker way of doing this instead of counting them all. But for the time being, we're just going to say 12 rows. We then specify how many columns of random numbers we want generated. So I have Q1 to Q4, so that's 4 columns. And then you can specify a minimum value and a maximum value. A rand array will generate random numbers between those two values. So let's just say 100 is our minimum and 200 is our maximum. And the final argument is if you want these numbers as a decimal or if you want them as an integer. So let's use true on the end here and generate some integers. Close the bracket, hit enter, and you can see what happens here. Now, I already had currency formatting applied to this range of cells. Ordinarily, yours would look like that once you'd finished the array formula. But once you have these in here, you can very simply apply your formatting, and in a very quick amount of time, you've managed to generate a whole bunch of numbers. Okay, so it can be really useful if you're trying to practice formulas and things like that. Now, let me show you one more example of rand array where we have a very large amount of rows and we don't necessarily want to count down them all. We can combine rand array with count A. So what we could do here is we can get Excel to count the rows for us. So instead of rows, instead of typing in 12 or whatnot, we could say count A, and then we would just need to highlight the column or the range. I can do this very quickly, Control Shift down arrow, And that will basically count the number of rows for us. And I could do the same with the columns. So I could say count A again, and I want it to count the number of columns, and then we're back into our argument. So let's say minimum value 100, maximum 200, and this time we'll go for decimals. Let's go for decimals, close the bracket, hit enter, and again it's going to generate. If I don't have formatting applied, it would be decimals in here. That is how you can combine rand array with count A if you have a large data set and you don't want to count down different rows. Another thing to notice with this particular function is this is what we call a volatile function. If I start clicking around and doing things, so if I double click up here to resize the columns, can you see as I do that, the numbers in the table are changing constantly? And this is what a volatile function does. It constantly refreshes when you start clicking around. Now, it might be that you're fine with that, but a lot of the time, if I've done this, if I was going to use this working data set here and start to do some calculations or maybe create charts, I don't want this data or these numbers changing every single time I'm clicking around and doing something. So this is where once I've done this, I would then select everything in here. I would say Control C, and then I would choose to paste the values only. Okay, so what that will do is it will throw away the rand array formula underneath, and now these numbers aren't going to change when we're doing different things. Okay, so just be aware of that. It's a volatile function that changes. Now, sequence is another one of those little functions that can be really useful in your day-to-day work. And all it does is it basically generates a list of sequential numbers. How can we use this in a helpful way? Well, let me show you an example. Maybe I'm listing out some participants in a race, let's say. And I want to have participant number 1, and then I want the participant, we're going to say Tom Bruce, and then I want participant number 2, so I need to go back over here, and we've got Emma Scone, and then I need to go to the next one. And it's a little bit tedious, but it's not too much of a problem. But we could use sequence to help us out with this and really kind of get this to automate itself so that the numbers are automatically input as we add the names. So sequence in itself, let's take a look at the arguments. So sequence will generate a sequential list of numbers. So let's just take a look at it in its most basic form first of all. So again, we can specify the number of rows that we want. So let's say we want 10 rows. I'm going to say 1 column. I want to start at number 1 and I want to step up by 1. That's what we're going to get. So let's take a look at it. We have our 10 rows. We have 1 column. We start at number 1 and the step value is 1. So it just goes up by 1 each time. We could modify this and I could say step value is 10 as opposed to 1. And it's going to go 1, 11, 21, so on and so forth. You could say that you want 20 rows instead. Or maybe you want to start at a completely different value. So maybe you don't want to start at 1. Maybe you want to start at 10 and go up by 10. All right, so there's lots of different ways that you can use sequence to generate lists of numbers. So how can this be useful for us if we want it to automatically generate numbers as we type names into a column? Well, again, what we can do with sequence is we can combine it with count A. We can select column C, which is where I'm going to type in the participant names, close off 2 brackets. And then what happens is when I enter name and hit enter, it automatically adds the next number. Now, one thing you can do to make this even better is notice that when I hit return, it automatically puts the number in before I've typed in a name. And this can look a little bit messy. If I wanted to stop there, if there was only 3 participants, I sort of have this number hanging over at the end. So we can modify this formula again. And all we need to do up here is after the column, if we just type in -1, hit enter, we're not going to get that. Okay, so it's going to work perfectly. Okay, so sequence can be combined with other functions like count A to make things like automated lists, or you could just use it to generate sequential numbers, which can be really helpful in itself. I am going to show you a couple more formulas, but these are the brand new ones, which have only been released in the last couple of months and are currently only available to Microsoft 365 users. These are by far my favorite, and these are the ones that I think are the most useful out of the entire bunch. Now, what I'm going to show you are the functions text before, text after, and text split. If you've ever had to break up data across columns, there are numerous different methods that we can use to do this. So let's take a look at a couple of the older methods that we would use to break data up across columns. And again, we've just got a simple example. I have some full names just here. You might recognize some of these. I want to split them into first name and last name. There's many different ways we can do this. Probably the quickest and easiest is to use flash fill. So with flash fill, we just need to type in the first one and press Control E, and it's going to copy it down. We can type in the second one, Control E to copy down. That is by far the quickest way of breaking up these names in this example. Now, flash fill doesn't work in every single situation. It works in a situation like this because we have our columns next to each other. But if I had a blank column in between here, or maybe I wanted to output it somewhere else in the spreadsheet, flash fill isn't going to work. It only really works if the columns are right next to each other. Okay, we need to know other methods for breaking up data. What else could we do here? Well, another really popular old school method is using text to columns, everybody's favorite. We could select all of these, go up to the data tab, text to columns, and we can click on next and we can choose our delimiter. So where do we want to split these names? Well, we want to split them where we have a space, okay? And then when we click on next, we can say, output it to this destination just here, and it's going to split up those names for us. So those are the methods that most people know when it comes to breaking up data across different columns. You might also use text functions, left, right, mid, in order to do this. But lots of these methods fall down when what you're trying to split up is slightly more complicated. This example is really easy. Most things can handle this. But what about if we have people or some of these students with a middle initial? You can see here we've got Brian P. Gosling, Emma K. Scone. But this isn't consistent. Not everybody has a middle initial. So when you have inconsistency, that's when it becomes a little bit more difficult to break up these names. You wouldn't be able to use flash fill, that wouldn't work. Text to columns will also not work. The only method you could use here would be to use text functions, left, right, and mid. And those can get really, really complicated. And I feel like Microsoft have listened to everybody who is constantly saying to them, the left, right, and mid functions are too complicated. Nobody remembers them. They've listened and they've brought in these much simpler functions for splitting up text. So let me show you how awesome these are. Let's do the first name first of all. I'm going to use text before to do this. The first argument of text before is simply the text that we want to break up, F6. All we then need to do is specify the delimiter. So we're saying output all of the text before the first space. So our delimiter is a space. Notice that the next arguments are all optional. We can define the instance number in the next step. I want the first instance of the space. I want to extract everything before that first space. Now, one instance, or the first instance, is the default. So I don't need to give the instance number argument. I can simply do that. And it's going to extract that first name. Double click to copy down. Okay, nice and straightforward. What about the last name? Because last name was a little bit tricky to do when you're using the write function. Well, now we can use text after. Again, we can say text is F6. What is our delimiter? Well, again, we're going to use the space delimiter. But this time, we want to specify an instance number. But if we want to effectively count back from the end of the last name, so if we want to count back, we can say -1. So this is basically going to find the first space from the right-hand side. So it goes backwards through your string. And check it out, nice and simple. Doing that using the write function is a lot more complicated. Now, what about the middle initial just here? How do we do this? Well, this is where we can combine text before and text after. You can do this both ways. I'm going to go with text before, and then we're going to jump straight into text after. And what we're going to say here is we want our text, we want our delimiter, which is a space, and then we're back into our text before. Again, we want to specify our space delimiter, and we're going to say -1. And let's double click to copy down, and you can see that it's picked up everyone who has a middle initial, but we also have some NA errors in here. Okay, so where it can't find a middle initial, we basically have NA. So what can we do with this? Well, we can combine it with the if NA function to remove these NA errors. So let's jump up to the formula bar, if NA on the front here, and then at the end, we just need to specify what we want to output into the cell if it finds an NA error. So I just want a space. So we're going to put that in quote marks, hit enter, and this time when we copy down, we just have the middle initial and we don't have any NA errors in there. This, believe it or not, is much simpler than using left, right, and mid to extract text. And these are so flexible, you can use them in so many different types of situation. Final example that I'm going to show you is the text split function, because again, this is another awesome new function which allows us to deal with splitting up text that has multiple delimiters. So if we take a look at this first example, so when we have employees, I've got Claire, comma, space Lucy, comma, space Mark. So this is fairly straightforward. I could say text split. I just need to specify where the text is and then specify my delimiter. So my delimiter in this case is a comma space. Close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to separate those across based on that comma space. Now, if I was to try and copy this formula down, it doesn't work. Take a look at the second one. Why hasn't it worked? Well, it's because we have two different types of delimiter in here. Now, the cool thing about the text split function is that it can handle multiple delimiters. So let's do this again. Go for text split. Again, we just need to select our text. That's fine. But when it comes to the delimiters, if we have more than one, we need to put it inside curly brackets. Okay, so our first delimiter that we have in use here is comma space, and then we just specify our second delimiter, which is a semicolon space, and then we close the curly bracket and close off text split. That is all we need to do, and then when we copy this down, it's going to split those up correctly. So you can imagine the potential of this. If you've ever downloaded data or your data's in a right old mess, quite often you'll have multiple different types of delimiter in between different words, and you need to separate out all of that data. Currently, or before these functions, that was a really difficult thing to do. But now that we have these new text manipulation functions, it makes it so simple. So that's just a sneak preview. If you don't have Microsoft 365, this is what Microsoft 365 users are enjoying currently. This is just a taster. There are literally 10 more functions like this available in Microsoft 365.